The Meeples and Miniatures podcast is sponsored by Two Fat Lardies and Coat Dance Paints, and also by the generous donations of you, the listener. Thank you to everyone for your support.
The Meeples and Miniatures podcast, episode 122, Across the Dead Earth, with guest Richard Chappell. This podcast was recorded on the 10th of March 2014. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Meeples and Miniatures podcast with me, your host, Neil Shuck. On today's show, I'm going to be chatting to Richard Chappell from Dead Earth Games about a project that they're currently funding on Kickstarter. It's a game called Across the Dead Earth, and it's a skirmish wargame set in a post-apocalyptic future, with the slight twist in that being that at least for this initial launch of the game, that future is actually set in the UK as opposed to the United States. And even just something like that kind of piqued my interest a bit. Just before we talk to Richard, I just want to explain how I got into this. Essentially, Richard emailed me and said, would you be interested in having a look at this? So I said, I'm always interested in having a look at rules and seeing what things are like. So Richard sent me a beta copy of what they got at the moment for Across the Dead Earth. And I suppose in some ways this new game is very similar to a lot of kind of gang-style war games you see out there at the moment. They have various different mechanics as far as how initiative works and combat or what have you, and then you have the fact that you're running through a campaign and expanding your forces, gaining experience. That makes it no different from a lot of the other war games that are out there. It has to be said, the one thing that really appealed to me about this game was the setting. As I said, the original setting for this game is in the UK. Now, I'm a huge science fiction fan, and one thing you may know, especially especially if you've seen any UK television, we actually produce some really interesting sci-fi series based on kind of post-apocalyptic stuff. Now this harks right back to my childhood in the early 70s, and a show called Survivors, which was more recently remade, but it was originally shown in the 70s, and it's by a guy called Terry Nation, who most people will know as the guy who invented the Daleks in Doctor Who. Now, as I say, this was around at when I was a kid, and I never really got to see an awful lot of it because actually the show was tended to be on quite near my bedtime. But I certainly caught up with it later on, and I've seen the remake as well, and what have you. And it's a really interesting take on looking at a post-apocalyptic world. In the case of Survivors, it was following a deadly viral outbreak, and looking at how that affects society. And the UK are really good at doing things like this. You've got other dramas like there was something called The Last Train, which is set in a world following an apocalyptic meteor strike. And you've also got other classic BBC series such as things like Day of the Triffids. Again, post-apocalyptic, set in another twist on things, but this time also happens to include giant plants. And of course, within the UK as well, you look at the what's happened with the movie market, with films ranging from the likes of 28 Days Later, Children of Men, and even down to something like Doomsday, for example, which was kind of a Scottish version of Mad Max. So, the UK, and especially, say, in the science fiction genre, has a very rich heritage of this sort of background. So it was really interesting to come across a skirmish game set in the UK, because you see so much stuff set in the States. So it was quite refreshing to see something in the UK, which is why I wanted to find out more. So anyway, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be chatting with Richard Chappell.
I don't like it, Sergeant. Me neither, sir. Good Lord, it's really looking pretty bad. Yes, sir. It happens every time, sir. It's too predictable, sir. How far do you think we've advanced, Sergeant? 6 inches, sir. It's always 6 inches. We advance 6 inches, then Jerry gets a go. The lads are calling it Hi-Go, Hugo, sir. Hi-Go, Hugo? Good grief. And they don't like it, sir. Oh, not like it. Seems pretty straightforward to me. Rather like cricket. We have an innings, then the other chap does. Well, that's all very well, sir, with cricket, sir, but begging your pardon, it ain't like that, sir, in war. I don't think Mr. Hitler plays like that. What, Hitler? No, gosh, he'd like to go all the time. Oh, Lord, sir, lummy. Oh. Well, sir, anyway, sir, it's like this, sir. If it carries on like this, Hi-Go, Hugo, me and the lads won't be coming to your Thursday evening games club, and that's the way it is, sir. Looking for more of a challenge with your World War II games? Are you tired of the predictability of Hi-Go, Hugo systems? Iron Bean Shopman provides real command challenges on an unpredictable battlefield. Two fat lardies, playing the period and not the rules since 2002. Pip pip.
Well, I'm very pleased to welcome to the show Richard Chappell from Dead Earth Games. Hello, Richard.
Hi there, Neil. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Welcome to the show. So it's really good to have you on.
Thanks very much. It's great to be here.
It's great to talk to you. I mean, the reason we're speaking on this show is the fact that you've currently got a Kickstarter project going on for a new skirmish wargame, haven't you?
Yeah, that's right. Across the Dead Earth. It's the first war game for Dead Earth Games, which we've essentially started as a company just to try and get this one out there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, before we go on to talk about all about Across the Dead Earth, what I normally do when I have people on the show, and listeners will know this, is that first off, I just want to get a quick handle on your gaming background and what you've been doing. So, how did you get started in wargaming?
Well, I think the story is very similar to an awful lot of people my age, in that the entry was through Games Workshop in the sort of early 90s. It was a cousin of mine that showed me some figures he had, gave me some figures actually, and because we were very young at the time, we played a very simplified version of the game, which essentially just involved rolling more than a 4 to do pretty much anything.
Right.
But yeah, I was into Games Workshop for a few years, and then I think in my teens decided it was the hobby on the whole was too expensive, and then got back into it a few years ago, really through just doing a little bit of internet research to see if there were any games about a specific interest of mine, which was sort of historical naval wargaming, and finding that sort of in my absence from the hobby, of course, the internet had happened, so everything was available, everything could be found. So, I mean, what started off with a small order for a few ships over the last few years has kind of blossomed into the full-blown hobby with the table in the attic and the familiar tale of hundreds of miniatures waiting to be painted.
All right, so you're a bit of a Langton fan, are you?
Yeah, absolutely am, yeah. Yes, indeed.
Okay, come on, confess all. Tell us about your collection.
Oh, well, I mean, the naval wargames thing, I have to admit, has sat unloved for a little while. I mean, I've got an English fleet and a French fleet, as you might expect, but then I sort of getting distracted on the internet by other Napoleonic things, and then of course found these wonderful Victrix and Perry miniatures, which were available so cheap nowadays. And so it wasn't long before I was back into 28mm wargaming and big black powder armies.
Oh right, so you succumbed to the lure of plastic, have you?
Well, only for large scale combat.
Yeah.
Where I think it's pretty much necessary.
Well, certainly with the size of Napoleonic armies, it certainly does help on the wallet, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And you don't tend to look at the individual figures quite so much when you're fielding 300 or 400 of them.
So how long have you been back into historicals? And I mean, is it just Napoleonics you've been doing, or have you been looking at other stuff as well?
Well, I'd say it's about 3 or 4 years now. That's all that I've been back into it properly. And not just Napoleonics, not just historicals. I mean, I've got Hail Caesar. Not a lot of it's come out of the box so far, I must admit, since I got that one. But having picked up the magazines, I then saw how many different things are out there, and the Osprey games in particular piqued my interest because they were sort of a one-off purchase book, and then a couple of small skirmish-sized forces, which as you'll probably have picked up, is pretty similar to what we're doing.
Yeah, that's a good segue to start talking about what's going on. Okay, so Dead Earth Games, and the whole idea for this new skirmish war game across the Dead Earth. Where did that originally come from?
I can't remember, I have to say. Well, I can remember writing the initial version of the game, or the sort of mechanics and stuff, but that was completely different. The first set of rules I wrote was a Napoleonic game, but a skirmish war game. So it was kind of like your Sharp novels and that sort of thing, with a small band of heroic acts, and character based rather than mass forces. And then that I thought it might be quite fun to try and turn that into a sniper based game. And I ended up with a set of rules called Stalingrad 1942. Right. But there's only so much you can do with snipers. So then it was, well, how can we change this so we can put more variables in? How can we get more characters in? How can we get more weapons in? And somehow or another, possibly because of the comics I was reading at the time or something like that, I ended up on the post-apocalyptic setting. I've always been into sci-fi. I've always written science fiction as well. So I guess it was two worlds colliding, really.
Okay, so moving on from there then, having got your setting, how did your rules actually originate? I mean, was it a case of you just adapting what you got from the Stalingrad rules and just expanding it into the new background?
I suppose the first game of it was because, I played with a couple of friends here in my attic each week, and 1 week they came around and we were playing Stalingrad, and the next week we came around and we were playing what turned into Across the Dead Earth. So the rules changed kind of like that, and that play testing just happened organically and naturally. But when I actually sat around to write, because the rules I had before weren't really written in any usable form for anyone other than me. Yeah. When I sat down to write, I wrote the intro and I just carried on writing. I was on paternity leave at the time, and when my daughter used to sleep, that is, I had quite a lot of time. She's given that up since. But yeah, I had quite a lot of time to myself, and as I say, I just sort of started writing the intro, and it went from there. And a week later, or maybe 2 weeks later, I had 20,000 words plus, and
that's not bad going for that's not bad going for a couple of weeks.
No. Well, as it flowed very easily, and I think because I carried on from the introduction, it kind of flowed in the fictional sense. It had more flow to it than a rule book as such. So, granted, I had to put the mechanics in. I had to say what a roll of a 7 or an 8 did, but I found it easier to write because I was kind of writing it in that world, I think.
Yeah. Now, quite unusually for a post-apocalyptic game, yours is actually not set in the States, is it?
No, it's not. No, it's set in the UK, which I didn't even think of as an aspect of it. I'm English. I'm from the UK. I was born over there, so I just wrote it, and apparently that's a big deal. I mean, it's good. It's appealed to an awful lot of people who have said, this hasn't been done before. But I must admit, I didn't twig until I showed it to anyone else that this was going to be a point of interest.
tell us about the actual background of the game itself.
In terms of the setting, or in terms of how you play the game? Okay,
first off, in terms of the setting. Yeah.
So I didn't want to, although I'm not shy about saying what my influences are, and the Fallout computer game was a big influence in terms of getting to post-apocalypse, and also the comic book The Last Man, which is about an apocalypse that leaves, as the name might suggest, women alive and one man. I kind of took those as inspirations, but I didn't want to do the same thing. And I didn't want the Fallout setting of just post-nuclear desolation. So what I ended up with was a war that engulfed the whole world, but with different effects in different places. Yeah. So in the UK, which is where I was writing about, we have chemical warfare. We have a disease which has killed off around 97 to 98% of the population, but of course hasn't affected buildings, hasn't affected the other animals to such an extent, or nature. So a couple of generations down the line, which is when Across the Dead Earth is set, you have a situation where, to some extent, nature is reclaiming what we had encompassed upon for the last couple of thousand years, and nature's going back through the buildings. So you have gangs of survivors, or, well, not survivors anymore, but sort of third generation survivors, eking out a living in sort of ghost towns, ruins, and general decay. But also, as I say, animals coming back to the fore to a degree. We have the idea of domestic dogs kind of devolving back to wolves, because only the biggest and the strongest would survive in packs, and that being quite a scary thing for the ill-equipped humans that have survived and managed to eke out a living.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, I suppose obviously one of the first things you kind of think about with an awful lot of these kind of post-apocalyptic settings, depending on where they're set, you get things like access to weapons is quite easy and what have you. Of course, moving that into somewhere like the UK, for example, puts a whole different spin on it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And a couple of people have said, how come the gangs have got sophisticated weaponry, or how come they've got military grade weaponry? But this game isn't set just after the apocalypse. As I say, it's a couple of generations along the line, and the gangs that you're playing are clearly the gangs that have survived, the gangs that have been successful. So although immediately after the apocalypse you are going to have people surviving with whatever they can find, and as you say, in the UK that's largely going to be certainly non-military equipment, but largely not even firearms. By the time we've got to our setting, our starter gangs are people that are probably trading with survivors from Europe, possibly even trading with the States, although a trip back and forth on the technology they have now would take a long time. Yeah. So we've got a mix. We've got a gang called the Forestkin who eschew technology completely. They blame technology for the apocalypse in the first place, so they don't use weapons whatsoever, apart from here and there, and one of them might use a shotgun. But on the whole, they eschew them. And then you've got other gangs who are trading successfully. And we've got a character called Fat Boy who's quite familiar to followers of the game, who carries an RPG. That's as much a status symbol as it is a weapon. That's him saying, I've been successful enough to get hold of this.
Yeah. I suppose it's one of those things of course, the UK still has military installations and all that sort of thing. X number of years down from the apocalypse, they should, one would imagine that they would have been raided and various other bits and pieces. So, as I say, although the general population isn't as weaponised as other countries, by that time, there is nothing to say that it would be any different, is it?
No, sure. I mean, we have a faction called the State, which is a pseudo or a quasi-government faction, and that's been formed out of the ashes of the military and of government. So they kind of have access to the genuine, the real military equipment that is out there today in our military bases, and to a certain degree in the police. But of course, whenever they lose a battle, that then falls into the hands of the gang that they were fighting. You've also got a lot of black market weapons out there, and an amazing number of shotguns. I mean, not an amazing number of shotguns compared to other countries, but when you reduce the population by 98%, you've got enough shotguns to arm pretty much everyone who's left.
Indeed, yes, because that is, as I said, that is kind of the one weapon in the UK that is quite prevalent at the moment, isn't it? So,
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's kind of our baseline. I think with most games, the standard weapon is a pistol. Is considered to be the easiest thing, but actually, they're of course one of the hardest things to get a hold of over here. So you're going to find a lot more people armed with shotguns than with pistols.
Okay, so you've already talked a little bit about a couple of the gang setups. Can we talk about that a bit more and how the game actually works?
Sure. I mean, with the gangs, one of the aspects of Across the Dead Earth is you should pretty much be able to create any gang you like. There's a certain degree of an RPG influence in Across the Dead Earth. You're only controlling a small number of characters, so we want you to be able to invest in these characters. And it's a persistent game. You can play in campaigns. You don't have to, but I think it's a more valuable experience if you do.
Yeah.
So in between games, you can expand your character's skills, or you can buy them grenades and possibly upgrade their weapons by imagining it has sights and things like that. All of that is built into the game rules. So you can start a gang completely from scratch. You can use miniatures that you might already have that are suitable from other games, or obviously we are bringing out a line of miniatures as well. So although the kind of starter set that we've done on the Kickstarter comes with 2 gangs which we've fully described, there's no reason why people have to use them that way. They can rename them, reskill them, or mix and match them to create their own gangs. But as I said, I have an awful lot of fun creating in my mind the various gangs that might exist in this setting and writing characteristics for them and imagining how they might act. So you kind of have more mercenary gangs, you have more moral gangs who are merely trying to trade and survive. Then you have the state, who I've already mentioned, and opposite them, sort of the trade guild, who exist largely to protect trade between settlements.
Yeah.
So and a lot. Just imagining that situation, there's a lot of scope and possible variety for different gang types, which, as I say, I'm immensely enjoying making them up.
So at this point in time, have you actually got firmly in your mind exactly how many gangs there are, say, in the base game, for example?
Well, what we've done on the Kickstarter is as I say, a starter set. So that consists of the rule book, which will be a book. At the moment, it exists as a PDF or sort of photocopied sheets, but that'll be a nice proper book with colour illustrations and everything. And then there will be 2 gangs that come with that. Adam's family, who are referred to throughout the book within the examples and stuff, and a more kind of nasty gang called the Red Claw gang. So that's all you need to play the game. 2 dice, a tape measure, the book, and those 2 gangs. As for how many gangs there'll be in total, there's no reason why, in theory, there's no reason why we should ever stop. As I say, you can use figures from other games or other settings. Yeah. There's nothing to stop you getting a sort of modern military set of figures which are easily available from all over the place and creating your own gang out of those. And I know there's lots of sets of sort of more near apocalypse figures of survivors and things like that who would possibly make great figures to use as the gangs that aren't armed with firearms, but perhaps with sports equipment and whatnot that you often see lying around in the more zombie-orientated games. Yeah.
So we talked about the fact that obviously you've run a Kickstarter. When we're talking, we're in the process of running a Kickstarter, should I say, which finishes at the end of March. As we're talking now, it's Monday the 10th, and you actually got funded over the weekend, didn't you?
Yeah, we got funded. It's towards the end of last week actually that we went over 6,500, which was our initial target. So that's been absolutely fantastic. I was never sure we were going to get funded at all. Well, you can't be sure that you're going to get funded at all, but here we are, and it's going amazingly well. So we've got a stretch goal up. We've got all of our backers so far are voting on what the next stretch goal should be. Should we meet the first one? And it's very exciting, I have to say.
Congratulations on that.
Thanks.
And can we talk a little bit more about the rules themselves and how the mechanics work?
Yeah, absolutely. The game uses 2d6 throughout, and measurements are in the normal way, in inches, because I'm an old style war gamer, I suppose, rather than centimetres and millimetres. The turn sequence is that each player acts with one of their gang at a time. So they do all of their actions for that gang member for the turn, and then the next player does all of their actions with one character, and back and forth. Okay. So You don't move your whole faction and then wait for the other person. I think that makes it a lot more of a tactical game because, of course, the situation is changing all the time. You can't just charge towards a single enemy thinking you're going to take them out because they can reinforce before that character will get to act again.
So what size is your typical force?
Well, we've described the forces as between 4 and 10 originally, but what we've sort of clarified since then is that your leader has a skill value, and that skill is used for numerous things, but one of those things is how many people they can have in their force that they can lead. Skill values are typically 7, 8 or 9, or they start at 7 but can be upgraded up to 9. So you can go from a force of we haven't tried smaller than 4, certainly, although it's possible, to 9, and then maybe as we expand, that might get bigger as well.
Okay. What sort of size actual board are we looking at here?
Well, I mean, we've got, as I say, I've got a table set up in the attic, so I've got quite a big table set up in the attic for playing things like Black Powder on, and we find that we only ever use the middle section of the board. Okay. So we've also played it on my living room table, which sits 4, so it's not a very big area. I played the other day at the local wargames club on I think a 2 foot by 3 foot table. So because you've only got small forces, you don't need a lot of room. And one thing we really think benefits this game is lots of terrain. You do need to be able to hide, to find cover, and to kind of run around and try and outflank each other, because otherwise it does tend to become a bloodbath quite quickly, and that's not all it's about. So loads of walls or trees or whatever you have is beneficial to a fun game, I think. So just crowd it all into a small area.
Right, okay. I mean, I must admit, the one thing I did notice in the rules itself is that weapon ranges are pretty short.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to write a simulation or to be what a lot of gamers would say realistic, because I don't think wargaming is realistic. Right. So we're not talking about maximum ranges. We're talking about the effective ranges of that person with that gun. And they are vastly scaled down from what a real weapon would to scale be able to hit. But what we're saying is what's likely to be able to hit. And you've got to remember that these weapons are old. The new weapons are not really being manufactured, so they're going to be less accurate and not well maintained compared to how, say, for example, an AK-47 today would have a range of, I don't know, a couple of 100 yards probably. But give that 70 years and an inexperienced user, possibly not so long.
So just to kind of put some numbers on that for listeners, what we've got is a situation where things like, for example, maximum range for rifles is 18 inches. Mm-hmm. And things like pistols and shotguns can go up to either 9 or 12 inches. But so basically everything, it really is quite short range, which again, I suppose, is another thing around packing the table with scenery, isn't it? It seems to be very much a game of manoeuvre rather than hunker down and find somewhere to hide and shoot at people, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's probably something that came out of the previous iteration of the Stalingrad game, which obviously was made for snipers, but you soon realise that 2 players trying not to move for a long period of time gets quite boring. So Across the Dead Earth isn't always just about killing the other side either. If you're playing a campaign, a lot of those games will be, the objective will be to recover an item of loot, which you can then use to spend on upgrades or to actually take an objective. So, yeah, there is a lot of movement in the same areas as well, because both teams are going to be going, or however many teams you've got, are likely to be going to the same bit of loot or the same objective. So you are actually going to get within those ranges very quickly.
You mentioned there is a potential for more than 2 players in the game?
Yeah, I mean, I unfortunately at this stage haven't played with more than 4, but I haven't really come across a reason why it should be particularly limited, given that the forces are small and each player moves or acts rather with one figure at a time. You can go quite quickly. The problem with multiplayer games on a larger scale is that 2 or 3 people aren't doing anything for 15 minutes while one person lines up all their their units, and that doesn't happen in Across the Dead Earth. So certainly we've tested it with 4, slightly bigger playing space, but no problems whatsoever. And I played it with 2 people who I'd never met before on Friday at a War Games club, and that went very smoothly indeed. So potentially you could get quite a lot of people involved.
But we talked about the initiative phase and people taking actions.
Yeah.
And that's on a alternate activation sequence.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about the missions involved in that. Can you expand on that further?
Yeah, I mean, if you're playing a one-off game, then you can obviously either just decide what you're going to do, or there's a randomization sequence. So you can play loot games, which are to recover items of value. You can play for an objective. We'll put in some sort of attack and defense scenarios as well. Mm-hmm. Or you can just play a good old war game and try and eradicate the other team. In a campaign, there will be some sort of narrative campaigns that follow a story, although I'm still drafting the first one. Now, what we normally do is create a map and have each battle representing an area on that map. So you play for complete control of a town or a settlement or an area. One of the fun things about that, particularly it being set in the UK, is that you can just grab a local map of where you live, divide that into segments, and say that you're fighting over different areas for it. And local knowledge there can be really fun. So I live in Birmingham. We can divide the map up and say, well, there's a strategic advantage to holding this area because it's the manufacturing district, for example. And in the advanced stages of campaigns, or the advanced version of the campaigns, we give a points bonus for holding areas, much like in the game Risk that I'm sure everyone knows how to play. If you control a couple of areas, your gang's getting more points as well. So that's a way of you can create quite long campaigns doing that, and that's what we tend to do within my gaming group, and it gets pretty competitive like that.
Right. Okay, so how long have you actually been playtesting that side of the game?
That's a good question. We've been playing campaigns since September last year. Before that, it was one-off battles. So, yeah, we've been testing the campaign since September. Mm-hmm. And one of those campaigns went on for a great big chunk of that time. One of the aspects with campaign play is that there tend to be 3 of us. So if one's missing, you can't do that so much. But recently we've created a sort of semi-campaign league game where, as well as having the points which you can spend on upgrades, we're just giving out a victory point for the winner of an individual bout. So that means if someone's not around 1 week, then they can make up for it later, and we'll include those into the rules as well.
Yep. So going back to some of the mechanics, so we talked about activation, and on that, each model then has a number of actions to perform, don't they?
That's right. So the vast majority of your gang will have 2 actions, and your leader has 3. If you play a long campaign, you've upgraded your leader an awful lot. Eventually, he'll have 4, but that's pretty rare. In fact, no one's ever done it, but it is there in the rules to happen. Okay. The 2 actions that any character can take, they can do any action twice if they want as well. So you've got things like moving, shooting, unsurprisingly. You can use one action as an aim, which then makes your chance of shooting better. So that represents taking that extra time over the shot. You can use an action to hide. So any character that's in cover is sort of making the most of that cover and actively hiding to increase how difficult that cover makes them to hit. And they can do something called waiting and watching, which, as the name might suggest, means that rather than particularly acting in their own turn, they stop and they're covering an area. And that means that if another player acts on their turn, moving within the area that your character can see, they can then interrupt that action and shoot them. So as if a sniper's watching a street, and on the other player's turn you walk across that street, where you can stop and fire right there and then. Medics, unsurprisingly, can try and heal other characters, and leaders have a special action, which is, with their 3 actions, they can use one of those to give an order to another gang member, which essentially transfers that action onto another character. So you might have already used them that turn, but they potentially get another go if that order's successful. Yeah. As well as all those actions that characters make individually, and we have an event card system in Across the Dead Earth,
Yeah.
Where players have generally 3 event cards in their hand, and those again are tend to be for interrupting the other player in their turn. So you can play an event card at any time, and a lot of them are things that sort of throw a spanner in the works, something that might distract a character or a tripwire that's been laid there, some sabotage aspects and things like that. And then there's a couple of really nasty ones. For example, we have a card called Sacrifice. What that does, if the enemy's trying to finish off your player, so they've been knocked out and they've moved in for the close kill, you play Sacrifice, and your character essentially pulls a pin out of a grenade, and both are removed.
Oh, right, okay. Quite nasty, as you say. Yeah.
Yeah, there's only one of those cards in the deck, but it really wipes the smile off the other player's face when you pull that one out.
Right. You say you have 3 in your hand. Are those the only 3 you get for the game, or do you replenish those at all at any point?
With the cards, there's quite a lot of cards at the moment, and we're kind of still beta testing them because I made up a number and we played them, and then a lot of the beta testers go, "Oh, I've got a great idea for a card." But obviously we have to try all of those out. We don't want any to be unbalanced. But I think there's going to be about, say, 20 different cards, and then that deck will probably be 50 odd. So some of them will be will occur more often than others in terms of sort of shuffling those out and dealing them to players.
Right, okay. And from a production point of view, are you planning to actually produce that as an actual card deck, or is that going to be something that's available as a download, or how are you looking to produce those?
That's not 100% certain. Well, we definitely will put them up as downloads on the website because that's easy for us to do and no problem. At the moment, they are going to be sort of in the back pages of the book, which you could then either photocopy and cut out, or download the ones from the website. But you know, if there's enough money in the Kickstarter, I would rather have a deck done, and that might be something that we do as an add-on for Kickstarters, because it's going to be relatively inexpensive for the players to add that on. It's more the design aspect that would cost us the money. But if we don't get it done now, we will do it in the future, I'm sure. But as I say, in the meantime, you'll just be able to download them from the website anyway.
Right. So, having put your gang together, fought your battles, and attained whatever objective, obviously we've talked about developing your gang, and it looks like you end up in a situation where you're putting individual members of a gang down different particular career paths and building particular skill trees. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right, and that's something which is probably more common to RPG players. But I used to play a couple of role-playing games, but I've much more played role-playing games on video games, and I think the influence of skill trees comes from there more than anywhere else. So at the moment we have 7 different classes which you can put any of your characters into. Well, I say any, you can only have one leader, perhaps, obviously, but the other classes are medic, assault, sharpshooter, scout, heavy, and scrapper. Right. And each of those classes comes with its own skill tree, and as you say, you can advance your character using the points that you've picked up in battles down those skill trees, which allow them to get better at the skills associated with that class. So a sharpshooter gets better at shooting. They get a plus to all their dice rolls, assuming they're using a long-range weapon. Scouts, if they're fully trained up, actually get faster than all the other characters. Scouts start off with the ability to move over terrain with no penalty, whereas most other people, if they were jumping over a wall, would slow down. The scouts just sort of skip over it, but they can actually get quicker. The medics can get more effective at being a medic, but then they can also pick up some other skills as well, like giving characters adrenaline shots and allowing them therefore to have an extra action. And then more recently, we've added the Scrapper skill tree, which actually was written by one of our beta testers almost entirely, a guy called Carl, who put that in because he wanted to field gangs with no ranged weapons, no guns whatsoever. Right. So he kind of created this skill tree just for melee and hand-to-hand, which has worked really well. And so with a couple of minor modifications, that's going in. So I think in the long term, we'll probably end up with a couple of skill trees more, but there's enough to be going on with, certainly, and The latest one I'm working on actually is a skill tree for dogs. We've decided to add some dogs into the game. There's no reason why gangs shouldn't have them. Okay. And they get their own skill tree. So you can either have a dog who is good at either attacking or defending their master or attacking the enemy, or perhaps you would want a dog that is actually better at retrieving loot, or perhaps even dragging an injured comrade back towards the medic.
Right. We talked a lot about the game. Now, you mentioned, as far as the Kickstarter is concerned, that you're looking at a couple of starter sets. Now, you've teamed up with a minis company to produce those, haven't you?
Well, we've essentially hired Andrew May, who, as you're right, he has a minis company. He owns and is the force behind Meridian Miniatures. He's working for us to create the ranges. Yeah, I mean, we'll do the actual production, but it's Andrew that's designed the three that we have now, and is on board at least for everything we've got in the Kickstarter, but hopefully in the long term as well.
So at the moment you've got these two particular gangs planned. So those are 5-6 minutes apiece?
That's right. Yeah, the Addams Family gang is 5 miniatures. The Red Claw gang is 6 miniatures, and we also have a mercenary called Crimson who will be exclusive to the Kickstarter, or exclusive for at least a couple of years just for the Kickstarter. So we've got her and 2 of the minis made up, which you can see them on the Kickstarter or on our website.
Yeah.
And then now that we have essentially achieved funding, Andrew's going to start work on fleshing out the rest of those gangs pretty soon. We've already got the rough designs of them done by our artists. So, I mean, as I'm sure most people can imagine, the most exciting part of this whole process for me has been getting artwork back from the artists, or in particular the sculpts of the minis back from Andrew, which is tremendously exciting. And then getting the metal from the casters, they're sort of a couple of weeks after that, and having these things in my hands. So a really exciting process, and I can't wait that now we're funded to get the extra 9 to go in those starter sets. But on top of that, we've set a stretch goal for another gang, which is another 5 miniatures, and if we go on and continue to be successful, then there's scope for an awful lot more.
I did notice one of your stretch goals is looking at essentially everything that you produce for the next year.
Yeah, for the next 2 years. Yeah, we're committing ourselves to this. It's not a sort of wild stab in the dark. We're going into business and we're doing this. We've got plans. We had business plan A, which was the Kickstarter works. Business plan B, which was the Kickstarter doesn't work. Business plan C, which was something else again, and all of them involve it going on for the long haul. I absolutely thoroughly enjoy every aspect of what we're doing, so that's great. And my brother, who's right behind me, he does all the sort of business end of things and counts for me, which I'm not very good at, and also runs all the IT, is really enjoying his aspect of it as well, and talking to other gamers and interacting is brilliant. And the enthusiasm that we've had from some people, in particular our sort of core beta testers, Johnny, Carl and Simon, it's just been absolutely fantastic fun. So we're saying if you pledge a certain amount, you'll get everything that we make for the next 2 years, and my dream, my vision is that in 2 years' time, all the people that have signed up for that are saying to their friends, look at all this stuff I got for that initial pledge. Look at how well it's come out. We can't guarantee that, of course. We don't know what's going to happen, but I'm pretty committed to making it a really cool thing to be a part of.
Yeah. Okay. So, obviously, you can't fully say exactly what's going to happen at the end of March, because you don't know what your funding level is going to be.
Yeah.
But okay, let's just make an assumption that that obviously you've funded the rules. We've got a couple of extra gangs available.
Uh-huh.
Where does Across the Dead Earth go from there? What are we looking for as far as bringing it to publication, bringing it to market, and then potentially looking at expansions? What sort of timescales are we looking at here?
Okay, well, we've put a timescale on shipping everything that people pledged to in the Kickstarter at October, and we're confident of certainly meeting that. It's kind of, there's some contingency already built in that, and I'd really like to beat it. But obviously, we've said it there for a reason, so that's kind of what that is. But we're not going to stop working at any point. I do this in my free time at the moment, and so as soon as that's done, we will be working on the next thing. Now, we're not going to sell anything until we've shipped everything that our Kickstarter backers, until they've received everything that they've pledged for, because that's only fair and right. But we will already probably be designing the next game. The design process kind of goes from me to an artist, and then to the sculptor, assuming that those people have the availability. We've already taken on board a second artist, although I say taken on board, it's freelance work. We've already hired another artist so that we could get things ready quicker, so people can see what we're doing.
Yeah.
So we've just put an update on the Kickstarter today, actually, of saying what we would like to do within the period of time we're talking about in those season pass pledges, which is 2 years. And ideally, I'd like to see a whole new game coming out every 2 to 3 months. Supplements and kind of extra things we're going to do with the rules or scenarios, campaigns, stuff like that. That's relatively easy for me to commit to because I'm authoring it, because I'm in control of it, and I can, I can promise that I can do something knowing that it's only me that has to do it. So I've got several ideas for expansions. The first one is going to be included in some of the Kickstarter pledges, which is to talk about more what happened in the rest of the world outside of the UK. How did the apocalypse affect the US and Europe and Russia? That's going to include a few extra rules to include bigger weapons that might exist in the US, particularly as there's the bit of a civil war going on there. And also to field slightly bigger gangs for the more organised forces in the US.
Yeah.
Then we're going to throw in some more interesting mutated animals from Europe, and we're going to have the Solace, who are similar to zombies. They're sort of infected by a viral infection, which causes and spread the disease, which resurrects the dead. They're quite zombie-ish, and that's something that these are people can but don't have to use into the core game. So that's one expansion. But as I say, I've got a couple of ideas for other things. I don't want to use it time before they come out. But I've already written 10 gangs, and I'd absolutely love to get all those gangs made up as miniatures. At the moment, we've got the pledges voting on which ones they wanted to see made first as stretch goals. But obviously, I'd love to get them all out there. So got a lot of plans. I mean, eventually the games will probably go on producing of the game, but there's an awful lot of scope with Across the Dead Earth. And one thing about an apocalypse is it does give you a kind of clean sheet. It gives you somewhere to start from, which you can really expand and expand upon.
Okay, well, it certainly sounds like you've got an awful lot of different directions you can go in, and so, as you say, an awful lot of plans on what you can do post Kickstarter and where you can go. So it sounds like now that the company is kind of up and running and you're funded on your first product, that there's going to be a lot more available for people to buy into in future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on the one hand, it is a game that you can play with the core set. You can have the starter set, you can have the rules, you can have the miniatures, and you can play like that. But I mean, we were talking earlier about my wargaming habits, and I think most wargamers are the same, and kind of get into collecting and get into painting and get into amassing forces. So that will be there for people that want it, definitely. And the miniatures can be used with other games and other rule sets as well. We've been talking to Paul, the guy behind Biosyndrome, who's quite fond of the idea of doing some crossover there. We've been talking to the guys behind Wreckage, which is a sort of further future post-apocalyptic game by a company in the States, and there's room for some crossover there. So the miniatures will exist as a range. As we won't force people to play our rules, not that anyone can, but we won't only be selling starter sets. The miniatures will be up there, the rules will be up there. I mean, to say we've got big plans is probably an understatement at the moment. Without getting too far ahead, we're trying to take each set of production as it comes.
Yeah. And as you say, this is obviously on top of your normal day job as well, isn't it? So
yeah. We've been busy, my brother and I, Mike. He's a very busy man, and in between working and entertaining my daughter, there's not many hours in the day. But luckily, I love doing it. So rather than playing on video games or watching things on TV, I'm beavering away at this or answering emails on the forums and things like that, and that's great.
Okay, so if people want to know more about the game, how is it best for them to get hold of you?
Well, anyone can email us at info@deadearth.co.uk, simple as that. And we have a website, which is www.deadearth.co.uk. We have a Facebook page, and the easiest way to find that is to type across the Dead Earth into Facebook. And simply because Facebook is kind of on my phone and on my Kindle, and the same for Mike, you're probably going to get the quickest response on Facebook, I would say. Mm-hmm. And of course, at the moment, there's a Kickstarter page up and running, and a lot of people interact in the comments section of that one they've backed, and we've had some really useful feedback. So we always get back in touch with people that way. But if anyone drops us an email at info@deadearth.co.uk, you can be pretty sure of a response through there as well. Fantastic.
Well, Richard, it's been great to speak to you. As I say, congratulations again on getting funded. It sounds like you've got a lot of exciting plans ahead, plus an awful lot of work if everything comes off.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I'd just like to take the opportunity to say thank you for being on the show, and wish you all the very best.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on the show. It's been really great to you, and exciting times ahead.
Indeed. Thank you.
Cheers now.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
The Meeples and Miniatures podcast is very happy to be sponsored by Coat d'Arms Paints. Now, Coat d'Arms have been supporting miniatures painters with their products for well over 20 years in some way, shape or form. Their current range is 150 sets of acrylic paint, which are available both as individual colours, but also in paint sets depending on period. Things such as the Ancients paint set, the World War II German, World War II American, World War II Russian paint sets. And they also include things like an ACW set and even a Horsetown set. That's one way to purchase your paints. And they also do triads. Now, if you're a fan of the three-colour system, made famous by the likes of people like Kevin Dallimore, you may like to purchase your paints with a dark shade, a medium shade and a highlight. And the triad system from Coat d'Arms allows you to do this. They also have ranges of textured paints called Brushscape, which allow you to paint from textures onto bases as well as colour. And these are ideal especially for smaller scale models. And if you're a fan of the dip method of painting, then Coat d'Arms have their own product available called Super Shader. This is available in light brown, dark brown and black. Coat d'Arms Paints have a whole range of products available to try. Check them out at www.blackhat.co.uk and be sure to tell them that we sent you.
Well, I hope you found that chat interesting. As I said before the interview, in a lot of ways, you could just turn around and say Across the Dead Earth is just another gang-related skirmish war game. You know, and in this day and age, there are more of those that you can shake a stick at. As I said, what attracted me to this game in the first place is the background. And it's quite easy to see that Richard has had a lot of really interesting ideas. I really liked the idea that they came up with in the campaign system about grabbing a map of your town and then fighting over it. I know it's something that you could probably do with a whole load of different things, but I suppose especially being set in the UK, the thought of essentially going onto Google Earth, taking a zoom in of a particular area where you live, getting a printout and using that as a map to game over is something that really appealed to me. So it's that sort of thing that really sparked my interest. You start looking and thinking, you're kind of looking around at where you live and suddenly start thinking, okay, what would this look like if it was then half overgrown again? What places would it be really interesting to fight over? How would society break up, and what places would people be willing to live in the setting, in the city where you live at the moment, for example? Or would people be avoiding the cities completely? So from that sort of things, the game just fired off a whole load of thoughts for me of possible scenarios to play around. And as with anything, I suppose a game that engages your imagination is something that potentially is worth looking at. So that's really how I approached Across the Dead Earth in the first place. And we're going from, as I've already said and as we've discussed, from a mechanics point of view, it's not a fantastic amount different to what we've seen before. Yes, things like skill trees are different, and yes, as we just said, they're very kind of an RPG or computer game thing. Building skill trees is not something you tend to see very often so far in a gang-style wargame, but it's a really good idea. And to be honest, I'd like to see that developed a little bit more. It will be really interesting to see not just different types of gangs or different gang members that improve the way they fight, but also they kind of mention scouts and medics, but maybe developing other people, people that will be scroungers, for example, people that will be good at finding stuff, much more useful in a campaign sort of setting. But it certainly seems like this with a lot of other games, there are a lot of possibilities available. And of course, from what we're just saying, if you're going to get in at the moment, I think you have the possibility of influencing at least a little bit where the game's going. It has to be said, I don't like everything about the game. More than anything else, I think I find the weapon range is problematic. And even given Richard's reasoning for the fact that these are effectively by now antique weapons, I think given the gaming area we're fighting over, I don't know, sometimes I just find artificially limiting weapon ranges can potentially be problematic. Even when people are used to 24-inch weapon range for something like Games Workshop games, for example, it's not even that. Much more reduced. Will tend to lead to things bunching up a bit. Having said that, if you're only playing over an area of a 2 or 3 foot square, then you can certainly see why they've gone the way they have. The other thing concerning weapons, I kind of think I'd like to see is, especially start looking at things like scarcity of ammo and various other bits and pieces, some more stuff being thrown in there. Starting to think about the fact that actually, we are that far in the future, and as Richard said, if people aren't producing stuff anymore because the manufacturing base isn't there, then things will start becoming scarce, and that whole aspect of scarcity of resources, I'd like to see expanded more than what we have at the moment. All that said, I think it's a good start and a sound basis for a game. And actually, rather unusually for a Kickstarter, has a pretty low starting point to get in and get the rules and all the miniatures. We're looking at £35 for a rulebook and 2 gangs. Okay, that's adding £13 shipping if you're outside of the UK. So what's that? Probably looking at something like $60, $65, I suppose, all inclusive, to get a starter game, which I think is entirely reasonable. And if you're looking for something a bit new and different, and you might think it's something you're interested in, I certainly think at that sort of price, it's worth a look. Okay, so that's all we have time for on this show. My thanks once again to Richard Chappell for the chat, and thank you, of course, for listening. This obviously has been something of a shorter show, and we've got two or three of these lined up in the next few weeks. This is actually recorded while I'm working away from home at the moment, so got the opportunity over the next few weeks to record several shows. Obviously, it's going to take a little bit of time to edit things together, but the idea is that over the next few weeks you'll see an increase in output as we talk about all various different things. I know some people have said they'd like to go back to talking a lot more about review shows and stuff that we've actually played, as opposed to looking at interviews and Kickstarters and those little bits and pieces. And I fully appreciate where people are coming from. I'm trying to mix things up. It's quite these things, as far as like interviews and stuff. They all seem to come at once, and sometimes it's a case of kind of grab things while you can. And so it does seem that you have an awful lot of these together when we're talking about games in development or games that are on Kickstarter or this, that and the other. And we're not actually reviewing games that we've played or games that currently exist. Don't worry, that is coming. And certainly by the time we hit Easter, we'll start talking a lot more again about reviewing games that have come out in the last few months. And then we'll obviously be going back and looking at some of our games that we've been playing for a while. So that's the plan. We've got another couple more interviews to do, and then we'll be starting to do some more review shows. Okay, so all that's left to say is thank you once again for listening. I hope you found the show useful. I will speak to you again very, very soon. Until then, happy gaming and take care of yourself. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. If you want to know more about Meeples and Miniatures, there are several things you can do. First of all, you can visit the website at www.meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. If you want to contact the show at all, you can email me at neil@meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. You can follow the show on Twitter. Simply look for M&M Podcast, or click the follow us on Twitter button from the website. We also have a group on Facebook. That's the Meeples and Miniatures Podcast Fan Club. Again, follow the link from the website. And finally, if you want to help us to support the show, you can always donate to the podcast by clicking the PayPal button on the donate page, again found on the website. Once again, thank you for listening. I hope you've really enjoyed the show. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.